Hello, today I'll be talking about how to dismantle and overhaul tyre valve connectors in old pumps. I'll be talking particularly about how to replace the internal rubber insert that grips on the tyre valve. It's fitted inside these connectors and it's the most usual problem that one has with an old connector, and it's the most usual thing that needs fixing. I'll be talking about two types of connector. On the left we have the very standard grey metal connector with a thumb lever which you depress to fix the connector onto the valve. On the right is the rarer Renroot connector produced by the Kismet company. This is a beautiful bit of engineering, a big brass connector with an adjusting boss at the bottom to adjust to get a tight fit for slightly different sizes of valve, or for when the rubber perishes inside the old connector. So we'll be talking about these two types of connector, and in particular replacing the internal rubber inserts. To dismantle the grey metal valve connector, it's necessary to clamp it in a vise, as I've shown here, so that the thumb lever is compressed down to allow the small retaining pin to be drifted out through the larger of the two holes. A drift is shown here, a thin metal implement that can be used to tap out the small retaining pin. You'll notice that the hole where the pin sits is in fact a two-part hole. At the top you see a smaller hole where the shoulder of the pin sits when the connector's in use, but here we've compressed the thumb lever down so that the small retaining pin sits in the larger of the two holes, the bottom part of that hole, which is bigger and broader and wider. So this enables the pin to be tapped out very easily to take the connector apart. It's important to do this, to compress the connector this way, otherwise trying to tap the pin out when it's located in the smaller of these two holes at the top will result in damaging the connector body. So a very important point to note when taking one of these old grey metal connectors apart. This shows the connector when it's been taken apart. The drift I've used is also shown in the picture, and what we see here are all the components: the valve body, the thumb lever itself, the internal adapter which sits inside the valve body, and the small pin. But right at the bottom here we see the most important thing to consider when we're refurbishing a connector. This is the usual thing that needs mending or replacing, and this is a small rubber insert. This enables the connector to grip tightly on the tyre valve when the thumb lever's depressed, and that squashes this piece of rubber against the tyre valve. The type of rubber I find most useful for refurbishing old connectors is soft silicon rubber hose, which can easily be obtained off eBay. The cross-section of the hose needed is shown here, 12 millimeters outside diameter, which fits the large majority of old grey metal thumb lever connectors. The inner diameter should be 7 millimeters, which just fits over the standard car tyre valve. Now, one only needs a short example, a short length of this, as I've shown here, to put into a valve connector to get it working properly, but it's most useful to buy it in longer lengths, maybe several inches long, because actually fitting a small section into the connector to make it work is a little bit of a trial and error job. One should use the dimension of the old piece of rubber that one gets out, but add on, let's say, a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch to that. Put it in and see if the valve connector can close. If not, gradually pare it shorter and shorter, keep trying to get it in until one hits the right length. As I say, this is a fiddling process. It's not easy. It often demands several trials, and the best implement to use is a very sharp surgical scalpel or a sharp Stanley knife to cut accurately across the width of the rubber tube. But here we have it then, a typical length of rubber tube that I've cut off, and that will fit back inside the valve connector and one reassembles it in a vise and taps the retaining pin in the opposite to dismantling it. While we're looking at these connector components, it is most important to recognise that there's a central pin in the internal component of the connector which mechanically depresses the Schrader valve. This is necessary on modern car tyre valves because pump pressure alone won't depress the Schrader valve as it used to back in the day when Schrader valves had weaker springs in them. So it's important that your connector has this central peg. If not, it won't work on modern tyre valves. So with the connector reassembled and put back into the vise, it's simply a matter of tapping this connector, this retaining pin, back through the large hole until it seats properly in the connector, and then you've got it back together again. We now move on to the Renroot connector. This is quite a similar design, except that the thumb lever is moved in this case by unscrewing a small locating pin. This in an old connector can be rusted in and one needs easing oil to get it out. In the worst cases, one will have to drill out the central pin and replace it with another one. The other thing to remember in the Renroot connector is that the bottom adjusting boss you see here should be unscrewed in an anti-clockwise direction looking at it before trying to dismantle it. This releases the pressure on the internal rubber. But here we have it, and I'll show you in the next video that it's been disassembled and we can examine the internal components. Here we see the components of the Renroot connector once we've taken it apart. We see the large outer housing with the screwed boss at the bottom, the adjusting boss, the thumb lever, the screwed retaining pin, the internal connector housing, which you see there with its central pin. But the two most important things to notice here are just below. Occasionally one finds in a connector a packing disc or two, which is used to adjust for different lengths of rubber. These, if you find this in the connector, you should retain them. And here is the sealing rubber, and what one notices in the Renroot connector, the sealing rubber has a small brass cap at the end of it, and the sealing rubber must be pushed into this as a tight fit before reassembling the connector. Again, soft silicone rubber hose can be used to overhaul the Renroot connector. In this case it's a bit larger. The outer diameter of the hose should be 14 millimeters and the internal diameter 8 millimeters. That's slightly larger than in the grey metal connector. And again, buy the hose in sufficient length to be able to do a few trial and error approaches to it, so that one can gradually pare down an initial length to exactly the right length such that the connector seals. When doing this, it's important to unscrew the adjusting boss at the bottom end there, such that one gets the maximum length of rubber tubing in there in the connector, and then adjustment of that boss will allow for any slight differences from the original. And as the rubber wears out or deteriorates with time, that can be used to adjust and retain a tight seal on the tyre. So that's the basis of the Renroot connector, and as you see, it's a simple matter to put it together again with the screwed retaining rod put in last. Before we finish, there's one important thing to say about the Renroot connector, in particular the screwed adjusting boss at the bottom. I've spoken earlier about the need to undo this to get the rubber insert in, but it is very important to know that this is on a stop thread, so one should unscrew it as far as the stop thread and not force it any further. Otherwise you'll break the stop thread and force the boss off and have problems then in damaging the threads. The only way to properly take this connector apart is therefore by unscrewing the small peg holding the thumb lever, which is how we did it earlier. So that's the end of the video, but just before we end, here's a reminder of the size of soft silicone rubber hose you need to overhaul and refurbish these two types of connector. The grey metal connector needs a rubber hose of 12 millimeters outside diameter and 7 millimeters inside diameter. The Renroot connector on the right needs slightly bigger hose, 14 millimeters outside diameter and 8 millimeters inside diameter. Both of these types of soft silicone rubber hose can be obtained in many outlets, for example on eBay.